They laughed when he walked in. Old boots scuffed, jeans faded at the knees, hoodie worn thin at the cuffs. His name was Elijah Moore, and the courtroom looked at him like a stain on their clean floors. The bailiff didn't even hide his smirk. The clerk barely glanced up. And Judge Redding? He leaned back in his chair, like a king addressing a jester. But what no one knew was that Elijah wasn't just a man defending himself in court. He was the one who signed the paychecks of half the people in the room. Mr. Moore, the judge said, practically tasting condescension, "You're late, underdressed, and, according to this docket, unemployed. Care to explain why you believe you have standing in this eviction case?" Elijah stepped forward slowly, calm, unbothered. "Because I never got the notice, and the building management's been charging me for repairs I never authorized." The courtroom chuckled, soft but sharp. A few whispered, "Ain't no way he owns nothing." Redding shook his head. "This is not your chance to grandstand. Do you even have legal counsel?" Elijah raised a brow. "Didn't need one." The judge scoffed. "Of course you didn't. Let me guess, you watched some YouTube videos, and now you think you're a legal expert." Elijah didn't flinch. He just reached into his hoodie and calmly handed over a thick envelope. "Actually, I brought some documents. Property records, bank statements, city tax receipts, and, a few letters you might recognize." Judge Redding took the envelope with a dismissive flick, clearly expecting it to be nonsense. But as he flipped through the papers, his expression began to change. His fingers froze on one page. His eyes narrowed. The silence in the courtroom shifted from judgment to confusion. Redding cleared his throat. Where did you get this?" "I own 17 buildings in the city," Elijah said evenly, "including this one. The courthouse is leased through a development trust. I bought that trust last year." There was a full 5 seconds of stunned silence. Then murmurs. Loud ones. Judge Redding's mouth opened, then shut. He looked down at the letter with the city seal. The mayor's endorsement. Another letter. A signed agreement from the state for public-private maintenance contracts. Elijah's name was at the bottom of every one. "I've been quiet a long time," Elijah continued. "Kept my head down. Let folks call me boy, janitor, even bum. But I built what I built with sweat, patience, and the kind of faith money can't buy." The bailiff's jaw was tight now. The courtroom no longer looked smug. They looked embarrassed. One woman near the back wiped her eyes. The clerk blinked in shock. But Judge Redding, red-faced, wasn't done. "So, what? You came in here to embarrass me? Teach me a lesson?" Elijah's eyes didn't flinch. "No, sir. I came to remind you that dignity don't live in clothes, and power don't always shout." There was a pause. Then the judge leaned forward, his voice lower. "You think owning some property makes you immune?" Elijah smiled, but there was no humor in it. "No, but it means I don't have to ask for respect anymore. I am the respect." The judge stared at him, nostrils flaring. "This isn't over." "I know," Elijah said softly. "That's the problem." And then he turned and walked out. No cuffs, no fines, no eviction. Just the sound of stunned silence echoing behind him. The same people who had laughed at him now watched him like they'd seen a ghost walk out of their history books. But here's the thing. That wasn't even the real twist. Because what the court didn't know was that Elijah had been quietly buying up old public buildings, courthouses, schools, even a police precinct, with the help of a small team. And the man funding it all? His grandfather, Amos Moore, once a janitor in this very courthouse, who'd been fired decades ago by Judge Redding's father after speaking out against discrimination. That eviction notice? It was sent by a shell company owned by the judge's cousin, hoping to push Elijah out of a building the family had tried to reclaim quietly. They didn't know Elijah had already bought the block. They didn't know he'd spent years building what they tried to destroy. But there's more, because later that night, as Elijah walked into the kitchen of his modest brownstone, a small envelope was waiting under his door. No return address, just a typed label. "You're digging too deep." Inside, a photo of Elijah speaking with the city inspector last week. And a note, "Your father wasn't the first we buried. Stay out of old business, or you'll be next." Elijah stood frozen, hand trembling ever so slightly. Because now, he wasn't just defending property. He was digging into a past someone would kill to keep buried. And somewhere, behind courtroom walls and marble offices, someone powerful was watching, waiting. The photo was grainy, taken from across the street. But Elijah recognized a moment. The handshake with the city inspector, the blueprints in his hand, the quiet satisfaction that he was finally closing the loop on a decades-old betrayal. That moment had felt like peace. Now it felt like bait. The note was short, cold, and final. Stay out of old business, or you'll be next. Elijah didn't sleep that night. He sat in his grandfather's study, surrounded by yellowed newspaper clippings and forgotten deeds. The room smelled like cedar and memory. Amos Moore had been a janitor, yes, but he was also a war veteran, a brilliant strategist, and a man who saw every floor he mopped as part of a battlefield. When Amos was fired from the same courthouse in 1974 for insubordination, nobody asked why. But Elijah always knew there was more. And now someone was trying to make sure he never found out. The next morning, Elijah returned, not to the courthouse, but to a forgotten building off Jefferson Avenue. It used to be a city records hall, but now it stood boarded up. Most thought it was condemned. Elijah knew better. He owned it, quietly purchased 2 years ago under a holding name. No one had stepped foot in it since the early 90s. Until today. Inside, dust swirled like ghosts. He moved past the peeling walls, past old steel cabinets and cracked linoleum floors, until he reached the vault room. His grandfather had told him once, in a moment of rare vulnerability, they buried the truth in paperwork. Son, paper don't bleed, but it sure can kill a man's future. Elijah opened the vault with a key hidden behind a false panel in an old desk drawer. Inside were dozens of file boxes. And inside those, contracts, internal memos, payment ledgers. One name kept appearing, Gideon Trust. The same trust Judge Redding's family had used to develop private prisons back in the 80s. The same trust that received federal money to gentrify poor black neighborhoods on the guise of urban renewal. And one document hit Elijah like a hammer to the chest. A letter signed in 1974 by Judge Redding's father, approving the illegal seizure of 5 properties owned by Amos Moore under a fake blight designation. His grandfather wasn't just fired. He was erased. Elijah took a photo of the letter and texted it to his closest confidant, Maya Lawson, a journalist with a spine of steel and a pen that made politicians sweat. But just as he hit send, the building lights flickered. Someone else was inside. He ducked, pulled his old service pistol from his waistband, and moved silently through the halls. His heart pounded not from fear, but fury. He wasn't scared anymore. He was ready for war. Footsteps echoed ahead. A figure turned the corner, wearing a dark hoodie, face obscured. "Who sent you?" Elijah demanded. The figure froze, then slowly pulled down the hood. It wasn't a thug. It was Jeremiah Redding, the judge's son. "I didn't come to hurt you," Jeremiah said. "I came to warn you. They're already moving against you. My father, he's not just a judge. He's the face. But the real power, it's Ryerson." Elijah narrowed his eyes. "Councilman Ryerson?" Jeremiah nodded. He owned shares in the Gideon Trust. He's been laundering money through community grants. The same programs your grandfather tried to expose. Elijah clenched his jaw. "And why are you telling me this?" Jeremiah hesitated. "Because I found my mother's journals. She was supposed to testify against my grandfather before she died, but she backed out, said she was scared, said Amos Moore was right. I think she was murdered." Silence. For a moment, both men just stood there, descendants of enemies, now allies bound by blood and buried truths. Elijah finally spoke. "You ready to go public?" Jeremiah's voice shook. "If it'll finally end this, yes." They spent the next week building the case. Documents, testimonies, even a video confession from an aging contractor who admitted to planting fake evidence against Elijah's family in the 70s. Maya published the expose under the headline, "The Moore Files, How a Black Family Was Silenced to Fund the City's Corruption." The story went viral. Riots nearly broke out. Judge Redding was forced to resign. Federal agents raided the offices of Gideon Trust. Councilman Ryerson disappeared. His last known location, a private jet headed for the Cayman Islands. Justice finally tasted real. But just as Elijah prepared to take the stage at a City Hall press conference, a delivery man handed him a box. No return address. Inside, a single burnt photograph. It was his grandfather, Amos, standing beside a white man in military uniform. On the back, in perfect handwriting, "He wasn't your enemy. He was your brother. Ask your mother." Elijah stared at it, heart sinking. His mother had died when he was 10, or so he'd always believed. But the photograph was dated 1985, 6 years after her supposed death. And that white man, a young Wesley Redding, the judge's older brother, a man the public believed had died in combat in the ADS, a man who might still be alive. And Elijah, he had just opened a door to a deeper secret, one that could change everything he thought he knew about his bloodline, the war, and the family feud that had cost generations their peace. Elijah's hands trembled as he finished the letter, the words hitting like thunder in his chest. "I think she's still..." Footsteps echoed ahead. A figure turned the corner, wearing a dark hoodie, face obscured. "Who sent you?" Elijah demanded. The figure froze, then slowly pulled down the hood. It wasn't a thug. It was Jeremiah Redding, the judge's son. "I didn't come to hurt you," Jeremiah said. "I came to warn you. They're already moving against you. My father, he's not just a judge. He's the face. But the real power, it's Ryerson." Elijah narrowed his eyes. "Councilman Ryerson?" Jeremiah nodded. "He owns shares in the Gideon Trust. He's been laundering money through community grants, the same programs your grandfather tried to expose." Elijah clenched his jaw. "And why are you telling me this?" Jeremiah hesitated. "Because I found my mother's journals. She was supposed to testify against my grandfather before she died, but she backed out, said she was scared, said Amos Moore was right. I think she was murdered." Silence. For a moment, both men just stood there, descendants of enemies, now allies bound by blood and buried truths. Elijah finally spoke. "You ready to go public?" Jeremiah's voice shook. "If it'll finally end this, yes." They spent the next week building the case. Documents, testimonies, even a video confession from an aging contractor who admitted to planting fake evidence against Elijah's family in the 70s. Maya published the expose under the headline, "The Moore Files: How a Black Family Was Silenced to Fund the City's Corruption." The story went viral. Riots nearly broke out. Judge Redding was forced to resign. Federal agents raided the offices of Gideon Trust. Councilman Ryerson disappeared. His last known location, a private jet headed for the Cayman Islands. Justice finally tasted real. But just as Elijah prepared to take the stage at a City Hall press conference, a delivery man handed him a box. No return address. Inside, a single burnt photograph. It was his grandfather, Amos, standing beside a white man in military uniform. On the back, in perfect handwriting, "He wasn't your enemy. He was your brother. Ask your mother." Elijah stared at it, heart sinking. His mother had died when he was 10, or so he'd always believed. But the photograph was dated 1985, 6 years after her supposed death. And that white man, a young Wesley Redding, the judge's older brother, a man the public believed had died in combat in the ADS, a man who might still be alive. And Elijah, he had just opened a door to a deeper secret, one that could change everything he thought he knew about his bloodline, the war, and the family feud that had cost generations their peace. Elijah's hands trembled as he finished the letter, the words hitting like thunder in his chest. "I think she's still alive." His whole life had been shaped by loss, his mother's death, his grandfather's silence, his community's pain. But now it was clear. None of it was an accident. It was a cover-up so deep it rewrote history. And at the center of it all, Wesley Redding, a ghost, a traitor, his mother's husband, and possibly Elijah's real father. Elijah stared at the burnt photo again. The military uniform, the background. He zoomed in. A sign, barely visible, said Lynchwood Veterans Medical. That wasn't overseas. That was 20 miles south. He was still here. The next day, Elijah drove to Lynchwood. It was an aging VA facility tucked behind a line of cypress trees, the kind of place the system forgot. He wore a plain jacket, no press, no entourage. Just grief, suspicion, and a copy of that photo in his pocket. The receptionist, a tired woman with kind eyes, looked up as he entered. "Can I help you?" Elijah nodded. "I'm looking for a resident. Wesley Redding." She paused. "That name's not on record." He slid the photo across the desk, maybe under an alias. She looked down and her face changed. "He's in the East Wing," she said softly. "Goes by William Reed. Been here 15 years. Doesn't get visitors." Elijah walked the hallway in silence, heart pounding with every step. Each door he passed felt like a window into a life paused. Then he reached room 214. Inside, an old man sat in a wheelchair, facing the window. He had salt and pepper hair, broad shoulders sunken with time, and a distant look in his eyes. But when Elijah stepped in, those eyes sharpened. "You came," Wesley said. Elijah's throat tightened. "You knew I would." Wesley nodded slowly. "You look like her." "Where is she?" Elijah demanded. Wesley turned back to the window. "Gone. Disappeared again after the bombing in '89. We tried to start over. But the past, it don't let go easy." Elijah clenched his fists. "You betrayed her. You helped steal land, destroy families, and build an empire off black suffering." Wesley's jaw clenched. I did terrible things. Things that kept you fed while others starved. I thought I was protecting you both, but I was wrong. You were a soldier," Elijah snapped, "but you became a weapon, and now you're hiding behind an alias while people like Ryerson and your brother cash in on the wreckage you left." Wesley's eyes burned. "Ryerson's worse than me. He's still moving money through shell companies, still laundering funds from state prisons into campaign coffers. If you want to end this, you have to go after him." "I already did," Elijah said. "He ran, but I'll find him." There was a pause. Then Wesley wheeled toward his desk and opened a drawer. He pulled out a dusty envelope and handed it over. "What's this?" Elijah asked. "The kill switch. Names, accounts, offshore transactions. Everything Ryerson buried. I kept it in case I ever had the guts to do right. Looks like you inherited that instead." Elijah took it, silently. Then Wesley looked up, eyes softer now. "I never held you as a baby. I never said your name. But I watched you grow from a distance. You made something out of ashes. Your grandfather would be proud." Elijah didn't respond. He turned to leave. But at the door, he paused. "I'm not doing this for pride," he said. "I'm doing it for the people you all tried to erase." And then he walked out. 6 weeks later, the city shook. Ryerson was found in Belize, extradited, and charged with racketeering, bribery, and conspiracy. The Gideon Trust collapsed. Dozens of politicians resigned. And in a historic press conference held on the courthouse steps, yes, the very courthouse Elijah now owned, he stood before cameras and the people who once mocked him. "I was called poor, ignorant, disposable," Elijah said into the mic, "but I was never powerless. The truth is our weapon. And justice is not blind. It just refuses to look in certain directions until we force it to." Crowds cheered. But even in that moment of triumph, Elijah felt a weight. A question still unanswered. That night, he returned to the VA hospital. But room 214? Empty. Gone. Wesley Redding had checked out. No forwarding address. No records. Vanished, just like Elijah's mother had all those years ago. All he found was a note taped to the window. "You're ready now." But the truth goes deeper still. Look in New Orleans. Ask for Lenora King. She'll tell you everything. Elijah stood there, wind whipping the note against the glass. His reflection stared back at him, no longer a man seeking revenge, but one unraveling a story bigger than his bloodline. Because if Lenora King was who he suspected, his mother wasn't dead. She was hiding something even more dangerous than a land grab or stolen deeds. She was hiding why the Reddings had turned on their own and what Elijah was truly meant to become.